Dobar dan, and again I'm going to be mixing English and Croatian just for the beginning. Welcome. I'm very grateful that everybody came from lunch so you can do the nap with us, although I don't think it's going to be much napping after you hear the stories we are going to be hearing. And we call this glitter, gambling, and grace, and we are going to go the opposite way. We are going to start with grace and then move on and finish with some glitter, hopefully, for all of you. Carolyn, welcome.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you, and thank you, Croatia.
I want to start with grace, but somewhere in the middle. I want to start with identity and asking you, do you remember when did you first felt as a woman? What kind of an experience was that? What emotions were connecting with this?
I remember when you showed me the questions a few days ago, I did think about that, and my first memory of thinking this was all very complicated, I think I was about 4, and my father was a photographer, he was a fashion photographer, and I remember being in his photography studio and seeing all these women in girdles and corsets and makeup and hair and back-combed hair and makeup and thinking, this is going to be complicated.
If you noticed, this did not have an introduction, and I'm not going to be introducing Carolyn because this whole 40 minutes is going to be many stories, and you're going to learn about her identity in many, many different ways. So first idea was it's going to be complicated, but now you really embrace and really embody the grace of being a woman. This is one of the things that I really notice about you. And I think that the woman I admire,
thank you,
the women who carry grace, and I see some of in the first rows that I really admire with that grace. And how did you go from complicated to graceful?
Oh my God. I have a euphemism. I have a word. I'm very bored of the word trauma. So I describe a traumatic history as being a tall, dark history. And so I have a tall, dark history that included stuff that I have always hoped would never happen to my daughter, and luckily it hasn't. But I think that I started drinking and taking drugs when I was 11, and it wasn't until I got sober 20 years later that things started to get a bit easier. But I've always been, I think when I was younger and I was very beautiful and had that kind of body, I was completely separate from my physical experiences, but also moving through the world with a lot of stuff projected onto me, but never seemed to meet it. So getting sober was and not because, I mean, I'm still funny and fun and all of that stuff, but it was the ability to sort of finally say no, because I drank to forget. I'm an ex-drug addict, an alcoholic and gambler, and I'm nearly 35 years sober. So I was drinking and taking drugs to forget what happened. And then when I got sober, I remembered and decided that that wasn't going to happen anymore to me or...
That's a good segue to gambling, so let me go to gambling part, and then we might be, of course, later on moving back to grace. So you were an addict. Why did you, so my thinking was to frame this first question about you being an addict, an alcoholic, a gambler. What was the first thing that made you press that fuck it button, as you call it, and just say, you know, like, I'm just going to do it all?
To do all of it?
Yeah, the drugs, the alcohol.
Well, when I was younger, when I was 11, my stepbrother was already an active heroin addict, so I had my first joint with him, and then we were allowed to drink spirits at home from the age of 11. I ran away from home when I was 16, and one of the reasons I ran away was to go looking for my father, but my father, when I found him, he didn't want to know, so... you know, somebody introduced me to a whole load of other drugs, and that was the beginning of everything. Nothing was what I thought it was going to be. It was all unpleasantly difficult. And I think the interesting thing about the gambling side is, especially now with my fascination with shame, gambling and risk, for me, gambling isn't just playing poker or going to a casino. It's how you gamble with your life and the risks that you take. And so a lot of shame underpinned how I behaved and felt. And in a way, I think that how I work with gambling now is kind of tempting the universe to see if you will actually survive each time. And so gambling with my life in a way, gambling with drugs, gambling with alcohol, gambling with mad experiences. I can't remember what the beginning of the question was, but that really was what I was doing for a very, very long time. And, you know, I ended up being really successful. I mean, the weird thing about having led such a wild and crazy life is I've also had an extraordinary life. And so I ran away from home when I was 16 and ended up living with a musician who's still a friend, but also a very successful musician. And so there were always drugs, there was always alcohol, there was always crazy behavior. And then worked in the film industry as a body painter and a makeup artist, and I'm very sorry for the makeup artist who had to make me up because not easy to do me, but I chose a way of life that I was actually very good at, surprisingly, but eventually within that way of life in the film industry and the music business, I did crash. And at the point I got sober, I was working with quite big artists doing huge jobs, but I was...
Let's just name some names, pretty please. We have to name some names.
Well, I was Freddie Mercury's body painter for 7 years.
Yeah.
Yes, my first Freddie Mercury video was I Want to Break Free, and that was hilarious, yes. And actually my last video with him was the last one he did before he died, and that was really sad. I'd reached a point in my using and drug taking where I really hated myself, and I ended up having to send my portfolio to America for some huge job. I didn't know what it was, and it turned out to be working with David Bowie. And so I was in Ireland, in Dublin, with David Bowie, and him and one other member of the band were sober, and they basically thought, ooh, Ireland's boring, we have a project. And so David spent 3 days and 3 nights persuading me that I had a problem, and I had a problem. And then I went with him to my first AA meeting, Alcoholics Anonymous. He took me, and I remember walking into a room full of old men sitting around a big wooden table, and David Bowie walking in with me, and that was literally the moment that my life changed, and I haven't drunk or taken drugs ever since. So, but the problem with the people I was working with, I mean, obviously David Bowie had got sober, but I was working a lot with people where it was normal to just take drugs, cocaine, whatever, drink all day. So when I got sober, nobody that worked with me because I was a drug addict and alcoholic would work with me, and nobody that had not worked with me before would believe that I was sober, so I lost everything. And ended up in a bedsit in London. A bedsit is a single room with a gas fire that you had to put 50 coins in to make it work. And I just began again.
How many people did you meet that had David Bowie take them to their first AA meeting? Yeah. So, before we go to shame and more tough subjects, can we give them just another story? Like you went to Italy at one point because you decided you're going to be a makeup artist for Italian Vogue without ever doing makeup for anybody else.
No, it's not true. No, I was already, so in London there was, in the late 70s, there was a really interesting club scene. Boy George, Steve Strange, probably most of you have never heard of these people, but there was a really interesting...
Boy George, yes, of course, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and it was Vivienne Westwood, and it was a really interesting time, and it was a really interesting scene, and you know, a lot of men were moving around the world in makeup, with their hair all back-combed, eyeliner, and various things. And so I'd been working, not in clubs, they weren't clubs like, it was a different time, there weren't phones, you know, and so the makeup was a really important thing, and I started building a portfolio, but I had no money. I'd left this I was living with this musician called Hans Zimmer, and I'd left him. Have a big life. And so I'd left him, and so I was I started in a bedsit, moved to live with my godmother, and I started making a portfolio, but I wanted to be a makeup artist and a body painter, and I got into another tricky relationship, and I couldn't get out of it, so I thought I sold all my clothes. I sold all my clothes, apart from what I was wearing, and I bought a plane ticket to Milan. So I had no money, no clothes, plane ticket to Milan, and some makeup, and a portfolio of pictures. So I arrived at the airport, sat next to a woman, I was 22, sat next to a woman my age. We started chatting. She was Italian. And what are you doing? Well, I want to be a makeup artist. Where are you staying? I have no idea. I haven't got any money, and I don't know where I'm going to go. She said, oh, my father will take care of you. So we got off the plane. Father picked us up, and he took me in. He found me a really nice small hotel room. And literally the next morning, I walked to Italian Vogue, and I literally knocked on the door of Italian Vogue and said, I want to meet Franca Sozzani because I'm going to be a makeup artist. And they said, fine. I went and met her, and she looked at my work, and she said, great. And she gave me a 4-month contract every single day to work for Italian Vogue. I don't think you could do that now. Life isn't like that. Life really isn't. Well, but it was, the fashion world is never a safe or kind place, and it wasn't safe or kind then. But I wasn't when I was a child, I was a model because my father was a photographer, and that was unpleasant. And again, that was that complexity of recognizing that. Even at 4 and 5 and 6, I was like in Vogue and Harper's Bazaar all the time. But there were such strange things that you had to do, and I had to do as a child. But once I was in Milan, I wasn't the focus. It was the models that were being sold by the agencies. And actually that guy that killed himself in the Epstein scandal. But I built my portfolio, and I came back to London, and that's how I started my career in the film industry for 20 years.
I just realized that at that time, when you were doing the commercials, it was actually your first time that you came to Croatia.
Yes.
And you did it in a very, very particular way.
I came to Croatia. Well, it was Yugoslavia. And I was doing an advert for Audi cars. You know, they have that thing, Vorsprung durch Technik. And they had a huge gin palace, a super yacht. And instead of the lifeboats, they had an Audi car on the side. And we traveled up the whole of the Yugoslavian coast, filming this commercial with a car instead of a lifeboat, these really glamorous cars. And it was actually one of the most beautiful places I'd ever been at the time. And I had a I really liked Slivovic. But I wasn't sober. So it was a disaster.
Yeah. So no more Slivovic. Please don't give her any present of Slivovic or anything.
No. No.
Good. I would say we are halfway, and I sort of think that we are in the afternoon of the last day. It's the weekend. If you would like to ask any questions, let's make this conversational, yeah? Because, you obviously figured out by now, this is a very, very interesting woman, right? So, anything you want to ask, please do. But I want to move to a topic that's much heavier. Being an addict, alcoholic, but also interestingly, just being a woman sometimes results in a lot of shame.
It does,
Yeah, you published a book recently that is literally called Shame, the Path Out of Hell.
Yeah.
Before, I'll ask you a question, and then I'll just give you some information to the audience. So I want you to first go into telling us why hell? What's hellish rather than unpleasant about shame? Because, before I met you, and I actually been through the workshop on shame, which is the most transformational experience I ever did with Carolyn, among other transformational experiences. But it's really transformational. But before I came to the workshop, without ever knowing what I'm doing here, and then I figured out everybody should go there, I was really thinking it's an unpleasant thing, but it is really hellish thing. So while Carolyn is preparing an answer, I just want to tell you, in front of the hall where we are now having this conversation, there are books that are sold from Carolyn called Shame, the Path Out of Hell. And after the talk, she's going to be also signing books. So if anybody wants to get the book, it's out there, and you can get the signature only for next half an hour after we do that, okay? Very exclusive as it gets. So what's hellish about shame?
Well, guilt is I did something bad, I did something. Guilt is based on an action. So guilt is I broke something, I stole something, I ate something I shouldn't, I forgot to send a birthday, whatever, that's guilt. You can have guilt and shame, but shame is, apart from the personal agony and pain of loss, I think shame is the most unpleasant of experiences that you can have emotionally, because shame is the internal felt sense that you are, and I don't know what your word would be, that you're broken, you're contaminated, you're toxic, you're unlovable, you're unwanted, you deserve to die, you have no value. It's an internal felt self that sits under so many things. And I think that it's an interesting thing to talk about when we're talking about, with a room full of women. You can have huge shame about your body. You can have shame about your labia, your genitals. You can have shame about your infertility. You can have shame about having had a history of sexual abuse. I've worked a lot I know we're not in the Eastern Bloc now, but over the years of doing what I do, I've worked in Russia and various other countries where the shame is very particular, very, very particular. You can have so much shame based on things that happen to you, and a lot of the things that happen to you can give you a shame that's actually rooted in religious or cultural or social standards. So you can judge yourself by the religious and cultural and moral standards of the country that you live in, and so you can have shame because you were horribly shamed by grown-ups, by teachers. You can have shame because you were sexually abused, you were raped. You can have shame because you're not beautiful enough, you're not funny enough, you're too thin, you're not fat, and you're too fat. Shame is this extraordinarily morphing emotion, and I think that I run these, what Eva was talking about, these really intense 3-day shame workshops. I only do them in person. Every single person that comes is terrified. And not, I mean, okay, I'm scary enough. I don't mind being scary enough, but shame is something that you might think it was an event. Let's imagine an event, a rape, or something an abandonment, a betrayal. But actually what happens is shame ripples. It's like throwing a stone in the water. It just creates, it comes out in so many different ways. And once it's there, you can have shame projected onto you by culture, by religion, by society. You can have shame projected on you by somebody else. You can have shame that you've created for how you've interpreted an experience. But it never is just that experience, and it actually begins to ripple through everything, and it underpins, do you understand the word underpins? It sits underneath how you move through the world. And so as a psychotherapist, I'm really interested always in, we have an internal relationship to ourselves. So what I could sit here and look some version of fabulous, but I might in my mind be very, very anxious. I'm not actually, but I could be. And you wouldn't necessarily know, and that's the internal relationship to the self, the way that you talk to yourself and how you hate yourself and you shame yourself. And then you have an external relationship to the world as you move through it. It's like if you have body shame, every time if you had to get up and walk across the front here, you would feel your body shame. Every time you get undressed, or when you don't look at your body in the mirror, I'm just naming specifics. You can have shame about a million things. And it's such a huge emotion. And the problem with shame, I mean, I have a daughter. I've always had an uncomfortable relationship with my body because I have a very tall, dark history, very much based around my body. And I've never been that thin. I don't need to be thin, but my daughter has times when she gets really angry with me because she's picked up my body shame and she looks at herself with my shame. And I'm really aware that I look at my body with the shame that my mother looks at hers. And so we unconsciously pass it on, but we also unconsciously, we pass it on in lots of different ways. But if you have, shame has rules. If you have shame, you will shame.
That was the thing that for me got me to think, Eva, you have to work through this, because I was not necessarily aware of my shame, but the moment you say, if you have shame, you will shame, that was for me, I started noticing that I would say something that would be sarcastic and funny, but it was actually shaming. Yeah. And that was really, mind-blowing, like how much we do not notice.
Yes,
that
even
we carry
sulking.
shame.
You sulk somebody, you sulk. Do you know what it is to sulk?
Kad se
Even,
držiš uvrijeđeno, ono,
you know, when you
duliš se.
sulk, you shame the other person because you abandon them. So the rules of shame are, if you have shame, you will shame. But also the worst thing about shame is if you hold shame, you're available to be shamed. And it is the emotion that we hold the most sacred. And we do never want to tell anybody our shame. We do not want to speak about our shame. We try to cover it up. So we cover it up with, you know, makeup, Botox, eyelashes, everything to make ourselves somehow appear in the world as a version of perfection that is acceptable, because underneath is this cavernous, sticky, black, horrible emotion. And it's a parasitic emotion that wants to replicate.
Yeah, I think that,
Yeah,
how you describe it is very hellish. I just realized that, you know, like I immediately start surfing on these questions. So I did not contextualize probably enough, because there might be people here who did not read who you are as an introduction. And I want to be very specific here, and I'm going to use your words. Just a little bit of introduction to contextualize this perfectly. So you are an embodied psychotherapist with areas of interest, work, and specialization, including in no particular order: sex therapy, couples and relationships work, maternal perversion, trauma, both past and current, addiction in all its forms, anxiety in all its forms, and pre- and postnatal issues. You're also Kundalini Global yoga teacher, and so on. I wanted to go back to shame. So you're talking about shame primarily as a psychotherapist, and of
Yes.
course somebody who experienced a lot of
Well,
shame.
that's because of the shame I experienced. It made me specialize in it as a topic.
And you are a woman. I want to talk about now the part of shame, which is there something specific? Do women carry a specific kind of shame? I mean, you described it already, yeah? I mean, a lot of examples are very specific to women. But is it really specific to women? Do you see the differences? I know at the workshop, there was, I think, just maybe 2 men on our workshop, right? And then 20 plus women. There were things that were very similar, but then there was things that were completely different.
Yeah.
So there is a gendered version of shame.
There is a gendered version of shame, of course there is. And I think that it makes me think of a saint whose name I cannot remember. But he was the saint who was responsible for defining the Virgin Mary. And so I think we're in a Catholic country,
Yes.
aren't we? So the Virgin Mary apparently gave birth without making a sound. You know, this idea that the Virgin Mary, not only did she not have to have sex to get pregnant, I'm not meaning to be rude about Catholicism at all, please. But the Virgin Mary is a very, very interesting, she's a very interesting example in a way, because the Virgin Mary didn't have to have sex to get pregnant, and she was moving around the world with the man that wasn't the father of the child. But of course the child was the Son of God, and of course she gave birth to a boy, and of course she was absolutely fine. She didn't have any tears, you know, she didn't have any problems breastfeeding. You know, there was a saint.
No postnatal depression.
Nothing. No, I mean, and there's a man, I can't remember his name as well, and my brain is not on saints today, I'm sorry, but, but you know, he became a saint because every time he looked at the Virgin Mary, milk would spout from her breast into his mouth. Thank you. But it's a very, very interesting icon to be set up against, because, of course, come back to the Garden of Eden, and, of course, you know, the silly bitch who believed the snake and took the apple, everything is her fault. And it's an interesting thing because, of course, women were thrown out of the Garden of Eden, along with Adam, and they knew shame. In biblical terms, it's the first use of the word. But we were told that we forever had to give birth in pain. And so we have this really interesting, very filled with dichotomies, this extraordinary, iconic woman against whom we're we're measured in her perfection, in her supreme perfection. And we cannot meet that, ever. That's an impossibility. But at the same time, the church then tried to ban the Virgin Mary because most religious observance or most religious practice is what's called transcendent, where God is big, God is a man, God is out there. You have to be facing God, and you need a priest to intercede. And the Catholic Church actually had such problems with the Virgin Mary because for so many women, once she'd actually given birth, she had, of course, the worst trauma that you could possibly have. You know, her son dying on the cross, she had to take him down. She found his dead body, went to find his dead body, and he was gone. And what happened over time, and very particular after the First and Second World Wars, and I imagine, I don't know, but I imagine here after your war, is the Virgin Mary actually became an extraordinary salve for women because it wasn't a transcended relationship. It wasn't somebody that was big and out there. You could sit in groups with the rosary and directly commune with the Virgin Mary, who knew all of the suffering, and where she'd gone from this absolute perfection to this intensely human being. The Catholic Church actually did try to ban the rosary and the Virgin Mary because it was taking women away from this transcended relationship to God and giving them a direct and personal relationship to God. I don't know if I've answered your question,
Yes, you
but
did.
I think...
Yes, you did. I'm just thinking, in last 30 minutes, please notice we went from Freddie Mercury to Virgin Mary, and God knows what's left for next 10 minutes. But let's get, I would like to, you know, as we are nearing the end, I would like to get closer to the glitter. Can yoga help with shame?
Can yoga help with shame? It's an interesting question. I train yoga teachers. I run a teacher training. I was brave enough as a woman about 8 years ago to decide that I would make a new form of yoga. So I threw away all the training manuals I had, and I wrote a 100,000-word manual through the lens of being a trauma therapist. So I'm basically a trauma therapist. I think that yoga cannot heal shame. It cannot. But what yoga does do, I teach yoga and breath work. What yoga and breath work, they're two of many things that help you learn to regulate. Because shame is an overtaking, really disabling emotion. And part of how I work with shame is to, A, lift off the shame, but then to be able to understand, I can still feel shame, of course I can. And I've worked with this stuff for nearly 30 years, but when you learn, that's okay, that's interesting. I feel horrible, I can feel it in my body, I can feel everything going tight. But I can also push it to one side and go, and that's fine. And you learn to separate yourself from it and not believe it, because shame is a huge part of the darkness in the world. And if you keep believing it, you're lost. And actually, at some point, you kind of have to sort of dust yourself off and go, actually, fuck it, I'm bored of this. I'm bored of holding on to this. I don't want this anymore. Okay, occasionally I'll feel it. Sometimes I'll feel uncomfortable. Any one of us can get to the place where you go, actually, no. You know, I don't have shame about my body now. I don't have shame about my face. I don't have shame. I just can't be bothered. Sometimes somebody will say, why haven't you done something? Why haven't you had Botox? Why haven't you had plastic? For what? I really like, you know, I don't have a, you know what I mean? I have to tell you something. I have an aging icon. I don't know if any of you have an aging icon, but my aging icon, if you want to look him up, is a man called Samuel Beckett. An Irish writer called Samuel Beckett. If my face looks anything like Samuel Beckett's by the time I'm 80, I will be thrilled. I have no problem with how I look.
Yeah, so don't bother being older. That's a good one. Let's have some questions, and then also, can you give us one micro practice? Can you give everybody, like, what's a micro practice, a breathing exercise, a stretch? We don't necessarily have to do any yoga here and now on the stage, but is there one micro practice that you can recommend to everybody? So next time we are feeling shame, anxiety, anger, what we should do?
I think the most important thing actually is to recognize that shame is very, very linked to your stress system. So it's extremely linked to your vagus nerve, which is a nerve that goes from the middle of your forehead to your pelvic floor, all the way through all the organs of your body. You access the vagus nerve through the front of your body. You access the spinal nerves through the back. But when you stretch open the front of your body, so I'm going to move, there's a very charming man, he's got the naughtiest eyes on the planet over there. I'm going to move my microphone, but I'll make sure that I can still speak into it. If you sit up,
Let's all sit up.
Sit up, sit up. Make your, you know, stick your belly out, stick your tits out, tail open, knees apart. If you literally put your hands on your shoulders and arc yourself open, raise your chin, take a huge deep inhale, pull your lips back and stick your tongue out as far as you can. And then exhale. Now, if all you did was look at me and laugh, I'm not impressed. Now I'm going to watch you do it.
Again.
Now we're going to do it again. Okay, so do it. If you just start to arc open and stretch up, pull back, raise your chin, really take a huge belly breath, pull your teeth back and stick your tongue out. And then exhale and close your eyes. And just sit, just be still. No one's going to touch you, no one's going to move. Just be still. If you notice you have released a hormone called dopamine, you have just profoundly changed how you feel. And that is a magical thing. And the thing I would always say is to remember that it's your brain. Your brain is really specific. It's your brain. It's your mind, what you think, and it's your body, what you feel. And at any time, anywhere, you can change it. And it doesn't have to be as strong as that. That's a strong movement. But can you feel it in your body? You've just said to your brain, your mind, and your body, you've just said, no, thank you, I'm fine, I've got this. And the other thing is slow your breathing down to 5 seconds in. If you can slow your breathing down to 5 seconds in and 5 seconds out into your belly, you're taking over your stress system and you're telling your stress system, I'm fine. Because when you have shame, everything is rooted in stories from the past, horrible histories, and you're living them again. When you have a lot of shame and you have a tall, dark history, your brain is programmed to live in the pain of the past and the fear of the future. And the moment that you do something like that stretch, or you slow your breathing down, you become right here, right now. And actually, right here, right now is exquisite and extraordinary and amazing and always perfect.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you.
Any questions? Any questions? Anna, 5 minutes is okay? Extra 5 minutes is okay? Perfect. Yes, please, we have a question over there.
Thank you. I joined a little bit later. I'm sure I missed a great deal of your messages, so excuse me for that. I hope you can maybe reflect and help us confront or deal with, or I don't know which verb to use, with the fear of the conflicts all around us. I will tell you just a quick...
No, don't tell a story, but I know what you're
No. I made a terrible mistake a week ago. I was sending photos from a hiking trip to my friend who lives in a conflict area, not reading the news just one morning, what I do every morning. And then I sent her, look how beautiful the nature is, spring is in the air. And she said, come on, aren't you reading the news? So something happened during that morning that when I didn't check the news. So how to deal with the threats? What is your advice? How to handle those kind of feelings and traumas? Thank you.
I think that it's a very contentious question because, of course, we live in a time now where, you know, everybody's on their phones. You have access to all the world's news constantly unfolding in front of you. And I don't know, how powerful do you feel about what's happening right now? How much ability to change anything? So if it's not your circus, it's not your monkeys. And that sounds harsh.
Let's repeat that. Maya, that's one of the wonderful things, other things that Carolyn says. If it's not
your circus, it's not your monkeys. And actually, I myself will really make the effort to move through the world being present, meeting, speaking to people, talking to people, being kind, being open. I'm not walking up to people and going, I'm a trauma therapist, can I help you? That's not my job at all. But you know, if I'm sitting on a train, people will always start to talk to me. If I'm standing, like earlier on I was standing outside reading, people come up and talk to me. And it's just about meeting people right here, right now. Come back to right now, because the only thing you have to worry about is when it's happening in front of you. If it's not happening in front of you, if there isn't a drama unfolding in front of you, you can't change anything. And if you keep looking at this stuff, then your brain is going to go into overdrive and your stress system is going to be literally fucked. And I say don't. I say don't. You know, they have discovered this wonderful way to weaponize our stress system. Time is up. To weaponize our stress system, which is literally, they have created a new thing since COVID called the threat bias. And the more they make us feel threatened, the more data we give, the more we look on the news, the more we look on social media. And all you're doing is you're just a product. You're not a person. But when you're here, and you know, I had a lovely breakfast with somebody this morning. I had a really nice time. Be here, because here is magical. And to worry about the possibility of what is going to happen, I don't know how many of you think you're psychic, but how much of what you think ever happens? Not even 0.000%. So just don't. Be here in the day, because if everybody around you is unhappy, but you're okay, everybody will calm down. Our stress systems, we're animals when it comes to our stress systems. We pick up other people's stress hormones. If we're dysregulated, everyone around us is dysregulated. I'd much rather move through each day and meet it as it shows up. And actually, I have two, they're not children, they're gigantic. I have a 27-year-old and a 23-year-old. Separately, I said to my son is the older one, I said, are you worried about the end of the world? And he looked at me and he said, why? Why would I worry about the end of the world? And I thought, oh my God, I did a good job. And then my daughter's a physicist, and I said to her in a separate conversation, do you believe in the end of the world? She said, no, not at all. And actually, if I needed any affirmation of actually being able to create rounded human beings, I think that's amazing. And I love that. And, you know, thank you. But even better than that, my daughter, she doesn't even wear makeup. And I just think, that's so amazing to be able to, her phone is permanently on silent. You know, she doesn't engage with any of it. Don't engage with it, you're just a product. When it happens in front of you, and I know it did not very long ago, at that point, the most powerful thing you have is to be kind. And the most powerful thing you have now is to be kind. So many people are so unhappy and suffering so much with what they're projecting and imagining. And that's not the truth. It's a truth, but it's not the truth. So, it's a good question. It's my advice. If it's not your circus, they're not your monkeys.
That's it. So, we have 3 more minutes, and I would just love if you can share with people how can they find you, how they can make you the part of their journeys in kindness.
Well, I do a YouTube channel about shame, so if you put my name correctly spelled into YouTube, I speak about shame on YouTube. I don't know if you know, does anyone here know what Substack is?
Substack?
Substack, I write on Substack, again, my name, and I teach 3 yoga and breathwork classes a week, every week online, and then I run workshops and trainings. So I have a website, which again, if you can spell my name, it is my name. So I'm easy to find. Good. And the book is good. It's what's described as a brave read. Because if you have arrived at the point where you're bored of your shame, the book is a path. It's written to be a path. And it is actually a very kind book. I really wanted it to be a kind book. And it has really nice practices in it that really help.
Okay, so if you want to get a book, we'll be outside. If you want to find Carolyn, get a little card which can get you to spell her name right. And then I wanted to ask you to spread some word glitter before we finish, but I think your message about kindness was as good as word glitter gets.
I think that in this time, you want to be kind, gentle, and I hate to use the word slow because it's very misunderstood. But kindly, gently and slowly. So literally calm the fuck down.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, everybody. So if you want to hang out with us, we'll be in front where the books are.
Thank you.
So much.
And thank you, Women's Weekend. Thank you so much. And thank you, Handsome Prince, with the microphone.